and Thomas Co.
It's time for the Russ Belville Show's Cannabis Q&A with Dr. Mitch Earlywine. Dr. Earlywine is a professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany and a leading author and researcher on cannabinoids and health, who pins the Ask Dr. Mitch column for High Times magazine. Get your questions ready in our live chat or call in to 971-533-7111 now.
Welcome back, dear listeners. It's half past the hour on a Monday, and that means it's time for our Cannabis Q&A with Dr. Mitch Earlywine. How you doing, Dr. Mitch?
Wild day, wild day.
Yeah, okay. Been a pretty good weekend out here on the West Coast, and we're glad to have you here on the show. Want to remind everyone in the chat room that you can get your questions ready now for Dr. Mitch, or if you want to call in live, the phone number's on the screen, 971-533-7111. But we always start off this segment by giving Dr. Mitch the first word in cannabis science, and I know what's on his mind. Dr. Mitch, you got to tell us how pot's going to cure Ebola, right?
Alas, I wish people would stop saying that. I actually am going to probably get something on the Normal blog about that this week because, no, as good as CBD may be for your immune system, it is not going to kill Ebola. Woo.
I bet you've been getting a lot of questions about that, though, lately.
Sad but true. Between Facebook and the 420research@gmail.com, I've had quite a few, and it's, I admire everybody's optimism, but let's not hit the Harlequin and then suddenly go out there thinking we're immune.
Okay. So what do you have for us for the latest in marijuana science and studies?
Two things out today that kind of blew my mind. First of all, I have to confess that I've often said you can't get a positive urine screen from just sitting around other people who are smoking. George Bigelow's lab basically had people sit in a really small room while 6 other people smoked some 11% THC cannabis. And if you use the low cutoff, that 20 nanograms per milliliter cutoff on the urine screens, they did test positive even though they didn't actually smoke pot. It really does look like they must have been in an awfully small room and certainly would have gotten a buzz on this, though, so I want to emphasize that was the predicament. And the other complete mind blower is Nadia Solowich from Australia, who never used to ever say anything good about cannabis ever, just published a paper showing that basically cannabidiol can be vaporized from a special 600 milligram source that's actually not cannabis, which the thought of her even administering any kind of cannabinoid in the lab just completely floors me.
So are some of these anti-pot folks from the past, these researchers, recognizing the handwriting on the wall and figuring they got to get in front of this thing?
I feel like she must have gotten funding. I mean, in Australia, it's not these giant grants that a few people get. They're pretty generous with small grants to lots and lots of researchers. But, the fact that she basically is now getting CBD in the lab is very, very different from anything she's done up till now, that's for sure.
All right. Now, on that former story about the hot box and testing positive from secondhand smoke, does that not provide some defense maybe for people getting fired or, busted for testing positive? Is that possibly the defense lawyer is going to jump on this?
I am quite optimistic that a number of judges are going to be hearing about this in the court really soon. I can't say they wouldn't have experienced some subjective effects under these circumstances. I've only got the abstract. I want to see if I can get the dimensions of the box, so to speak.
There you go. And you said it was if we were testing for the lowest threshold at 20 nanograms. What do you have any idea how many workplaces or schools test at what levels? I guess 50 is the normal.
50 is the usual, and there was only a single positive at the 50 cutoff, so I'm certainly going to try to argue for that one from here on out. That 20 is pretty rough, and as we know, some of the driving ones are even lower than that, and I just find that pretty reprehensible.
It's interesting how we're getting all these different levels where, states like Colorado and Washington have set a 5 nanogram limit. The NFL had a 15 nanogram limit that they're going to bump up to a 35 nanogram limit. Major League Baseball uses 50. The World Anti-Doping Agency uses 150. How come they can't come to an agreement on what they're looking for?
Well, and the sad thing is none of those have really covaried with any kind of impairment that's at all meaningful. The fact that the NFL or the sports communities think, cannabis is some kind of doping agent is just so preposterous. I don't know whether to laugh or cry.
All right, we got some questions coming in from our chat room. Isla Siegel would like to know what kind of cannabis is good for menopause and hot flashes.
Well, so we're still gathering data on that, and we don't have any strain-specific evidence. I've heard good things about juicy fruit for some of the gastrointestinal type symptoms associated with menopause, but it's literally just anecdotal stuff. So I can't swear by it, but juicy fruit would be my first recommendation, at least based on what I've heard.
Isla lives in Colorado, so we'll have her test each strain and report back.
Okay, great.
Canna Justice in the chat room would like to know, he says, the endocannabinoid system. Why do doctors not learn about this, and how do we get them to?
The bottom line was, at least when I was at USC, I got to give at least one lecture about that over at the School of Pharmacy and over at the med school. And slowly but surely, this is picking up. I have a wonderful student at the Albany Med School here who's spreading the word on that. But in truth, it hasn't been a target for a lot of the medicines that we have, and so that's been in part why physicians haven't really focused on it. It just hasn't been particularly practical for the drug companies who are going to be, sending them their medicines. I think as more and more data are coming out and as attitudes change, they're certainly going to get individual lectures on it, and it won't be long before there's a semester-long class on the endocannabinoids.
Yeah, we really need to have that happen. I recall some survey showing something like 13% of medical schools were teaching about it now, or some low number like that.
I mean, it's embarrassing. The number that are even teaching about nutrition is remarkably low, too. So, I mean, there are just some things where our model of what is medicine has kind of gotten in our own way here. It's not about prevention. It's about treating people after they're already sick.
All right. We're speaking with Dr. Mitch Earlywine, a marijuana researcher and expert, and taking your live questions at 971-533-7111. Also picking up the questions from the chat room. And in the news today, I told the story of how a Colorado company has gotten a $250,000 grant to try to develop a THC breathalyzer. Do you hold much hope for the ability to either come up with a breathalyzer or some sort of point of detection, instant way of knowing how high someone is?
I mean, I want to emphasize, too, that they have to kick in $250,000 of their own, right?
Yeah,
and this is not just some charity, shall we say, coming out of the Colorado area there. I'm not optimistic about this, and I wish they would focus more on impairment, because I think for $500,000, you could develop a pretty stellar measure of how well somebody is functioning on psychomotor tasks that correlate highly with driving. And I would rather see somebody, basically have to, walk a line or juggle or any kind of motor task that's actually going to predict driving ability, rather than put something weird on their fingers to see if they've touched pot recently, or get something in their mouth to see if there are any THC residue or something like that. It's just not going to be the kind of predictor of the behaviors we really want.
Yeah, I think the only real predictor of how high you might be would be if you go to talk to the cop and smoke is coming out of your mouth. Then maybe. Maybe they got you. Yeah. There was a report that came out, a little bit of controversy involved with this. The folks out at Project CBD have a report on the hemp oil scammers, supposedly Canaway, Cannabis Science Inc., and I forget the other one, that are trying to produce these CBD oils supposedly derived from industrial hemp and supposedly legal in all 50 states. Had you seen the report, and do you have any comment on it?
I mean, the report is 30 pages, and it's pretty extensive. And I'll tell you, they did their due diligence. They were extremely open-minded. They did the testing. They've done really everything they could possibly be expected to do without shelling out a ton more cash. And I'm afraid their conclusions are pretty much consistent with some things I've written in the High Times column over the last couple of months. It's just you can't really get high-concentration cannabidiol out of stems and things like that. And then this tacit assumption that it's all legal. CBD is still a Schedule I drug in the eyes of the federal government. So this, hey, we can mail it to you and nothing to worry about, and, try our gum, it'll make you live forever, those claims just really are inconsistent with federal law and with the data that we've seen gathered by Project CBD.
Another story out today talks about the Colorado Health Department making recommendations that nearly all medicated edibles should be banned in Colorado, leaving only hard candies and lozenges, because, you know, adults don't like candy and cookies and gummy bears and stuff. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, it's really all a question of dosage. There are tons and tons of edibles in Colorado that are only 10 milligrams in a dose. They're extremely well marked. They're clearly delineated, and I think certainly any recreational user can handle that. And I feel like it puts medical users at a real disadvantage. The oral administration is super good for insomnia and things where you want that slow but steady presence of THC and its metabolites in your system. And so I just think this is really misguided. If they want bigger letters, if they want more elaborate labeling, by all means, but to try to ban these is really just going to create an underground market in edibles. Yeah,
it's like, do you want to go from the brownie that's got a label and tells you how much THC it's got in it versus the one that somebody makes in their pan at home and sells anyway? It's I think Mason DeVert had it right that the people of Colorado voted to keep this stuff regulated. They didn't want it to be unregulated.
That was the point. And in truth, they're not the ultimate in accuracy yet, but I feel like we're just a couple of steps away from making everything just ideal. And, the tacit assumption that these have to be removed, there's just no way to fix it, is completely unfair.
All right. And, of course, we got Halloween coming up in a couple of weeks, and the annual trick-or-treat scare is out that for some reason someone's going to put a $15 Chiba Chew in place of a 5-cent Tootsie Roll in your kid's bag. Any thoughts on trick-or-treat and keeping the kids safe this Halloween?
I mean, it's funny because all those old legends that we used to hear back in the 70s and 80s about, razor blades and things like that have pretty much been disputed as urban legends in the Culture of Fear book by one of my colleagues back at USC. And I honestly don't think anybody wants to put a $10 edible into some little kid's bag. I don't think that that's very likely. If you see, lemon drops or watermelon things or stuff like that that isn't wrapped or isn't individually wrapped and you don't want to bother with it, throw it away. And if you do want to hand out candy that kids are going to feel good about, I would focus on individually wrapped candies.
There you go. That's wise advice for